Today, the feast of Saint Barnabas, originally named Joseph, Jew from Antioch, who in his conversion is renamed Barnabas, which of course means son of encouragement. Here's what I love about this character. It has to do with how he lived out, in essence, the gospel that he received. I call him the apostle who gives the second chance. It's the story of what happened with John Mark. Paul and Barnabas, the last section of the reading that Sarah read, has Paul and Barnabas being commissioned, a prophetic word is spoken into the church, send them forth, and hands are laid on them and they are sent forth. And then the next two chapters are full of extraordinary stories. Boldness, amazing miracles, just an incredible sense of, in essence, seeing what God was doing, acting upon it in a way that released the gospel into the lives of people after people, in the same way that you see Barnabas saw God at work when they sent him down to see what was going on among these Gentile converts. It's hard for us to think about that, but when that happened, that was brand new. In other words, we have to rethink what we're doing here. And God really used Barnabas to, in essence, create the breathing room for Gentiles to come into the life of faith. Well, eventually what happened was they took on a man named John Mark. Tradition says that this may have even been the same Mark that wrote the gospel, which means it was the kid who ran away naked when Jesus was arrested. And that he and Paul had a falling out because John Mark got scared, didn't want to keep going with him, and he said, if he's unreliable, it's dangerous out there, we can't have anybody, we can't have a quitter. But Barnabas saw something more than the quitter. And so it actually split the two of them. Paul wound up going with somebody else called Cyprus. And Barnabas, who was the one that hooked up with the kid John Mark and said, come on. And eventually, by the time you get to 2 Timothy at the end, you've got the writer of 2 Timothy, Paul, calling John Mark an invaluable helper in the gospel. You would not have had that earlier by any stretch of the imagination. And again, if tradition is accurate, then this is the same man who not only wrote the Gospel of Mark, but was the first bishop in Alexandria, who helped establish the church in Africa. I mean, he came a long way from the teenager who ran away naked at the arrest of Jesus. Barnabas saw that. Because you see, that's in essence how God acts in our lives. You see, Barnabas is acting on the gospel that he has received. So he himself, isn't it always the case that what we learn about God, what we love about God, which draws us to God, is a certain aspect of the gospel, and that becomes actually more precious to us than other parts, even though we may love it all. So I have this sense, if that's true, that Barnabas himself was someone who knew God to be one who not only had the first chance, but offered the second chance, and the fourth chance, and the 10th chance. How many times must I forgive my brother? The disciples asked Jesus. 70 times? No. More than you can even think about, 70 times 7. That's the God that we see exemplified in Barnabas. That's what he lived out. And it was that he had received from God that made him the son of encouragement that he, in fact, was. You see, the more I know him, the more my heart is softened. The more my heart is softened, the more I love him. The more I love him, the less I'm preoccupied with all the things that I need to do. Because if I'm thinking about all the things I need to do, people at that point actually just become necessary appendages to get done what I want done. If you're in that mode, you're not an encourager. In fact, what you notice is not the encouragement of their hard work. What you notice is how they're failing you all the time. And those are the things that you keep up in your memory. Do you know people like that who have a list and who never ever let go of the list? That's, you see, precisely the opposite of what it means to be an encourager. Forget the list. Why? Because it's just? Actually, no. Because we have a God who says, I will remember their sins no more. And that's what God desires to work in us. That as a result gives us the capacity not to look at someone and immediately see their faults, but instead not be blinded by that, but instead to see what God is doing and how to encourage what it is that God is doing in the life of an individual, an organization, a group of people. It's not that they're naive. You see, that's what the list keepers almost always say. Oh, you're just naive. But there's a grace in it, because since we believe in the resurrection of Jesus, which is, in my thinking, the key to everything, that no matter how many times I may fail, the resurrection of Jesus in the end, in me, is in fact going to win. These things are written that you might know that you have eternal life. Not that you're going to be good enough to get there. There is a huge difference. Which means even in the person in which I perceive failings, no failure is final. Because it's the resurrection that's the key to everything. The eternal life that God has implanted in us. That's what I believe Barnabas could see, because it was what he had received, which is what gave him the capacity to be the encourager as opposed to the list keeper. So, gosh, if it were not for Barnabas, maybe the Gentiles might not have come into the same freedom, which means maybe the Gospel of Mark might not have been written. Maybe I and my ancestors would not have heard. Or if they did hear, what they would have known is a Judaizer religion that was nothing more than a new set of laws. Thank God for Barnabas. But thank God for the God who makes Barnabas possible. That we, in turn, might also be people known as those who see, encourage, and bring freedom. Amen.
Amen.